Insert witty intro music here. Hello
Not
and
morning
welcome.
people do boo boo.
Hello and welcome to episode 3 of Not Morning People, a show where my friend Chris, Laura, and myself talk about life, technology, and share stories. Today's topic is what is your first experience with the internet? But let's start with some introductions. Chris?
Hello, my name's Chris, and I am a computer programmer and a father living in Carborough, North Carolina.
Laura?
Hello, I am Laura. I am a taxonomist. I am a mother of 2 grown children, and I live on Staten Island, New York.
I'm going to interrupt just a tad. Can you explain what a taxonomist is? Because I don't want anyone thinking that you stuff dead animals and place them in interesting. Because that is a taxidermist.
Yes, that is
a valid
taxidermist.
hobby and profession, but not necessarily what you do.
Right, and it's
It
not
is
an
not what
advanced
I
word
do.
for taxi driver either, right?
No, this is very true. Yes, no, so when you are, for example, doing online shopping and you want to browse all of the different categories of merchandise, things like that, someone needs to create those, right? So essentially, that's what I do. I create lists for the internet.
Thank you. And I'm Nick Ruffalo. I am a software developer, father, husband, maker. I do lots of things. I like wearing hats, although I'm not wearing one right now. Okay,
You are an expert hat wearer.
I am. You know what? Maybe. So my next project was supposed to be. Well, my next project is supposed to be version 2 of my light up suspenders. So I have a pair of suspenders that have LEDs on them that play Pong. They do a few different things. So they play a bunch of different animations. There's some sound sensitive ones. So as you yell, they get louder. They look like, the equalizers. But one of them is they play Pong. So one side is the left and one side is the right. And then there's a button on one and a button on the other. So, the lights just kind of, it's the LED light is the ball, and then you just bounce it back and forth. And I wanted to make version 2.0 of that because the first one I did, I threw it together really quickly. It was just not put together well, and it was also my early days. I didn't know nearly as much as I know now. But because of the pandemic and everything, I don't want people to have to walk up to me and like press a button that's very close to my hips. Like I just figure it's just a little too close. So I want to make it
2 dials right here? 2 dials. Wait,
well, I was going to go with Bluetooth because I figure anyone can just press their phone, connect to a Bluetooth device, and then they can just press a button, and that's not too bad. It's a little bit of lag, but no big deal. So I've been wanting to do that, but maybe a hat is more appropriate, but I don't know. We'll see. All right.
I think it's funny that I know of you as the hat guy, but it seems like in your daily life you're not as hatty as when you like go out to conferences and stuff.
No, I only actually wear a hat when I go to conferences. Yeah. It's like my thing to get recognized because nobody wears hats.
Right.
At conferences.
Exactly. Yes. Yep. Exactly.
All right. So next, what are you reading, Laura?
Well, inspired by Chris and our discussion last time, I got myself a copy of Clara and the Sun by Kazuo Ishiguro, and it arrived yesterday. So I'm looking forward to starting that.
We can do a little book club.
We could.
Chris?
I am reading several things, as always. I'm doing one thread where I'm reading classics that I didn't read as a kid. So this is Mrs. Frisby and the Rats of Nim. And then I'm reading I'm reading a graphic novel that my son recommended called Smile.
That's a good one.
I think it's a series. It's sort of like a memoir about this girl growing up, and specifically about getting braces and all of the social turmoil related to that. It's quite good.
Yeah.
Quite good.
That author
wrote
4 or 5 books, probably more now, but my son loved them.
Yeah, it's really quite good. Very funny, well drawn, relatable. Anyway,
Nice. And I just
yeah.
finished It's All Relative by AJ Jacobs, and I just realized my
Mm.
video's mirrored, so that's not going to be as
Well,
helpful as it was.
we
Um
saw it forwards. I did anyway.
oh,
Oh
you
no,
did?
not in the stream.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, definitely. Yeah, that's yeah. Um but so yes, I finally finished that. It's a great book about a man's quest to figure out his own genealogy and then his attempt to create the largest family reunion ever, and all the follies and foibles that go with that. It was definitely down my alley because it had just enough humor to make me laugh a few times, but it also had like actually interesting facts. So I learned a little
Mhm.
bit about genealogy. Um, like I learned a lot of useless trivia. Like I learned that many Jews did not have last names until mid I think it was like 17th century Europe decided that they needed to assimilate more, and they required everyone to have last names, and those last names were assigned. And apparently if you lived in an area where they wanted more money out of you, they would extort you and they would ask you to give money. And if you gave money, they gave you a nice last name. And if you did not give money, they gave you a last name that was somewhat offensive, like Horseface. So they would translate
Oh,
Horseface into whatever their native language is. And so that's the origins of some people's last names. And again, just useless, silly trivia that I would have never known otherwise. But yeah.
Mhm.
wow.
Again, history is just crazy, and humans are
Awful.
yes.
Yeah, this is a moment, but I will say, if anybody has HBO to get to watch this, there's like a 4-part miniseries called "Exterminate All the Brutes." I don't know, has anybody heard of
Yes,
this before?
No.
It's
I watched
it's
it.
it's extraordinary. I mean, it's kind of like a Howard Zinn People's History of the United States, but kind of specifically about colonialism of the Americas and Africa and stuff. And it's sort of like
Yeah,
this is the
yeah,
real
yeah.
history of what happened and the
It's
fallout since
horrifying.
then. Yeah, it's
Yeah,
very dark and horrifying, but like it's everyone needs to like watch it with their eyes open anyway.
it is. Exactly. No, it's completely compelling.
Yeah.
There's a whole like website and bibliography
Uh,
to go along with it. It's so well researched. It's
yeah.
incredible.
I think it was based loosely on 3 books on a similar subject that you can find
Yep.
in the bibliography, I'm sure. But yeah, quite good. Recommend it.
Awesome. Yeah, I love learning about real history.
Hmm.
Hmm.
It gives me hope
Oh,
because
this is very real.
I look at
Yeah,
today,
for real.
and we certainly have our problems and issues, but I'm like, things were so much worse. And it's like, well, I completely understand why people think this, because that's how they grew up and that's what we've been doing for centuries, and we're hopefully a
Mm.
little bit better than that. A little bit. Hopefully, maybe.
Well, at least we're like talking about the things now. You just think about how many things have happened recently as far as just like I went to all of
Right.
the like Monticello and some of the other presidential houses a couple of years ago, and they've completely redone them so that it's like
Mhm.
half about the president and maybe a little more than half about the slaves, that lived there
Yes,
and that like interacted with the white people and generated children
exactly.
with the white people and like what was their experience like? What was their and like what kind of what's the word like schizophrenia is going on in the minds of like Thomas Jefferson and James Madison, where he can like look this
Right.
way and think about freedom, and then like lean into his chair and look this way and see the slave village of the humans he owns. So
Exactly. I
we're
mean,
doing that now at least.
Yeah.
that is progress for sure.
Yeah.
All
Anyway,
right, so switching gears. What are you what are you looking forward to this week? I have myself first. Let's see.
hmm
So my son finished school. Not like forever, but at least for this year. So
Mhm.
it will be nice to kind of have him around again, and hopefully join me on my walks, and maybe we'll take some bike rides. So having a little bit more time with him, and also not having to worry about the rat race of getting up super early to get him out of the door and things like that. So it's a minor thing, but it's a nice change. Chris?
It will be nice seeing you at a conference where you're both wearing matching hats.
Soon
His
enough.
and his, hat. Me, so I just had my kids for like summer vacation, so this weekend will be more quiet, which I guess I look forward to the quiet sometimes too. But on Friday, I'm having like a catch-up phone call with a guy. He's like one of these people that that's like he's one of the smartest people in the room. He's like a young, from my perspective, a young dude. He's like 32, and he was a client of mine. He was like the chief financial officer of this startup pharma company maybe like 5 years ago, which he's 28 when I knew him, when he was the CFO. And like I just noticed on LinkedIn that he's now like the CEO of a publicly traded pharma company. I'm like, holy cow, that's amazing. And then so we're having like a catch up phone call. He was one of those guys that like he was a client, but he was so cool and we clicked that like we became friends and I went to his wedding and now we kind of keep in touch. And
Oh,
like seeing somebody like that have so much like
yeah.
success, um and like well deserved success. He's also one of like the nicest, sweetest dudes I've ever met. um so we're gonna have a little catch up phone call on Friday, and I can figure out, I can try to ask him what his stock options are. No, just kidding. Like catch it up with a friend, so that's a fun thing.
Yes.
Good times. And Laura?
Well, I'm looking forward to a couple of things. Next Tuesday is my older daughter's birthday. So I am currently shopping for her. Not quite sure what what I'll ultimately end up with for her. And then the following day, Wednesday, is our first in-person gathering for the company that I work for. And it's been forever since I've seen these people. In some cases, I've never met them in real life. So, because they came on since the pandemic. So I'm really looking forward to that as well.
Nice.
One sort of like look back thing that just happened, which isn't looking forward, was this last weekend when I had the kids for the summer. My younger one, Charlie, on Friday was his like 2 weeks waiting period after his second shot. Like he's 14 and a half.
Ooh.
This was the weekend where he could actually do things. So we did all the
Sweet.
things. Like he had a friend
Yeah.
over in the house without masks. We went to
Wow.
one of his favorite restaurants and like ate inside without masks. And we went to the mall and like just browsed around Barnes and Noble and went, like I took him to a few stores to like look for some school clothes and stuff. And like it was just so, like he was like alternately like beaming and like still like terrified sort of in a way.
Yeah.
But
Yeah,
ultimately like he
exactly.
loved the whole experience, but he kept on like walking into stores with masks and then being like, I don't think anybody's wearing them in here. I'll take mine off too. And just like kind of see him go through that process mentally of like, I'm okay
Yeah.
now, like I'm safe now, was such a thrill and a relief.
Oh, lovely.
So yeah.
Exciting.
Well, what are we talking about? An internet,
So
right?
yeah,
The
so
internet.
let's dive in. So let's start with the earliest memory. What is the first time that you used two connected computers? Let's go reverse order of that. So let's go up to Laura, if you remember. If not, you can
God.
pass.
I remember the first time two connected computers uh, that I was aware that was possible. And that was my senior year in high school. So that was back in 1983. Um, and we had this enormous box in like this wooden cabinet that had a phone receiver on it. And I would just hang out in the lab where this thing was. But it was the noise that really put me off, because so we would take this phone receiver and put it upside down in this weird cradle it kind of had suction to it. And that would set off a bunch of noises that, now we know is, it's what the internet sounds like in real life. But it would dial up to the University of Delaware computer in Newark, Delaware. It just, the shrieking noise of these things connecting, it put me off. It just completely put me off. I just did not want to be a part of that. So yeah, that's my first memory, is this horrible shrieking.
Was it kind of like, did you see War Games, where like whenever he connects to the computers or whatever, like he has a phone and he sets it in this little cradle?
A cradle. Yeah, exactly. That was exactly what it was. And the guys in my school were not as put off by it. But for me, it was just a noise thing, and I couldn't handle it. So it was years until I was comfortable being in that kind of environment.
And Chris, what about you?
Yeah, let's see. So I was thinking while Laura was talking about the first thing that came to mind was like, I think I made it all the way through grade school, middle school, and high school, like having used computers, but ones that weren't connected to anything. Like we had a Mac lab in my high school, but they weren't like, you would go there to like write your paper and play Karateka and some other like Bard's Tale and some games or whatever. But they were always just very standalone. You'd bring your disk and pop it in and do your thing, and then like take your stuff back with you. So that wasn't really networked. And the first networked, like persistent network that I can remember is like when I was in college, literally, and if I wanted to send an email, I would have to go down to the computer lab in my dorm where they had like, I swear it was like IRC or like it's something. It was like some terminal-based thing where you would log on to your email. But that's actually not my first memory of network computer. The first one would be probably mid 80s. We got a personal computer. We were like poor, so we couldn't afford to get an Apple IIe or or a Mac. I mean, Macs came later, but so we had a Commodore 64. Did either of you have those?
I did not, but I'm well versed in them.
Yeah, so we had this Commodore 64. And cool. This was pre-internet. This was probably 1984, 1985 or something like that. And in our house this was in Wisconsin. We had a basement, and there was like a computer room. Like now, every computer, everyone has 3 computers in their pocket. But in 1984, there was like a specific room for the like shared computer, and it was down in the basement, and it was like connected to a television, like a CRT television as the monitor, with a little switch between like television and computer. And Commodore 64. So like, and then there was this pre-America Online system called Q-Link, which was kind of like a glorified bulletin board system with a graphic interface.
Exactly.
And even that, like, we were too poor to like afford. I think it was like $9 a month or something like that. But even that, like, we couldn't really afford it. So we would like I don't even know how, like my aunt would get accounts to this thing, and we would all like share them. They were like, I don't know, they were like, I don't know, and they weren't illegal accounts, but they were like accounts that a whole bunch of people would share until like Q-Link caught you, and then they would turn the account off, and then you would like get another one. Somebody had a list of these accounts, so you could go on and like go on to chat rooms and stuff. But yeah, like it was one that you dialed into, and then like it was exciting when we went from like a 300 baud modem to a 600 baud modem, because then you would have to like wait less long. And then there was the whole thing of like, it was one phone line in the whole house. So if somebody was in the basement doing Q-Link or whatever, and then you were upstairs and you wanted to call your friend, and you would pick up the phone, and like Laura was saying, you'd be like, and you'd be like, and then you'd disconnect the person downstairs, and you'd hear like, boom, boom, you just cut me off the Q-Link.
Right.
That was, you were sharing the audio with machines. Anyway, what about you, Nicholas?
So I'm trying to connect the dots exactly on the timeline as to which came first. So I
Mhm.
do recall using CompuServe because it
Mhm.
came free with we had gotten a gateway as the family computer. And
Mm.
I remember dialing in because we had CompuServe first, and when that went away, AOL was becoming the more dominant thing, so we switched to as many free AOL accounts as we could. But
Mhm.
roughly around the same time, I also got involved with BBSs. And the way I got
Mm.
Mhm.
involved with that is, and it's funny that you mentioned the sounds of the modem connecting and everything. So I was very intellectually curious as a kid, and there was a magazine which I believe is still around called 2600,
Yeah,
and
Hacker Magazine.
Yes.
it was a hacker magazine. And while I didn't necessarily get involved or interested in like the really dark side of that, or at least the illegal side of that, just the sheer curiosity of like, how do things work? And it was
Right.
actually the story, and I'm gonna say it's a myth because I don't know if it's actually true. But there is an infamous hacker whose name was Captain Crunch, and the reason the magazine is called
Yeah.
2600 is because in a box of Captain Crunch there used to be a whistle, or there was a whistle prize, and that whistle, if you blared it, it played at 2600 hertz, which happens to
Yep.
be the frequency that telephone lines use to hang up. So if you were to make a phone call, a long distance phone call, and then blow that whistle, it would play 2600 hertz into the phone, and the phone would think, or the phone company would think, that you have hung up, but you did not. So it
Right.
would allow you to do a
Right.
long distance phone call and not have to be charged for it. So that is
Oh wow.
that is at least the myth. But when I heard that, I'm like, that's how the world works. Like, it blew my mind, and I got completely kind of engrossed in that world. And through that world, someone handed me a list of BBSs, and it was like an
Mm.
old dot matrix printout, and it had a list of phone numbers and names. And it was always a gamble because you'd call, like, 3 out of 4 of them had already been defunct by the time you got the list. So you'd call
Mhm.
it, and then like
Right.
someone's mom would pick up, and they're like, "Why does everybody keep calling me?" I'm like, "I'm sorry," but you can't respond. You can only hear. So like you'd hang up, and then they would,
Right.
some people who are savvy would like call and say, not necessarily the cops or whatever. They try and like do star 69 or whatever, and you're like, um.
Yeah.
So that was always an awkward call of like, "I'm sorry, your phone number was on a list of BBSs." Like, what's that? I'm like, "I don't.
Yeah.
I'm just 12.
Yeah.
Please stop yelling at me."
I'm just a kid.
So yeah, so it was either CompuServe or BBSs was my first interconnected computer story, but they were definitely both around the same time.
Cool.
Laura, I think your friend Mike wrote like a best-selling book on like bulletin boards. It was like this big thick book about bulletin board system. It was like a phone book kind of, where he talked about
Yeah, it
all the
was a
different ones,
directory.
and yeah, that was
Yeah.
kind of fun.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Was it just a directory or like?
I think it was like a guide to it was like a guide to BBSs, like all the popular ones and like how you connected to them and like what kind of stuff you would find there, and then like his thoughts on like how useful or interesting tidbits about those, you know, sort of like
Yeah.
yeah, like a guidebook to this great unknown of bulletin boards.
It really was such a weird concept. And like, again, you had to pay for a phone line. So like it cost money to run,
Yeah.
but it was, for the most
Exactly.
part, they were free. Um
Yeah, and very local, like hyper local. Like there
mhm.
would be like
Yes.
lots of like this. And my aunt was really into bulletin boards. I never really got that much into them, but yeah, like this is where we go and like do our ASCII text cosplay or whatever. Like, um, the other thing
Hmm.
that I remember was like there was just so much wait. There was like so much waiting involved. Like if you really wanted to be
Yes.
on Q-Link, like you would just be like, oh, it's connecting for the next 2 minutes or
Mm.
something. It's
Right.
like going through the motions of, or like trying to get into a chat room or something, and then like you just would wait for the screen to do stuff. But even then, it was thrilling. Like stuff popping up on the screen, it was like magic. Like, these are other people. These are real people. We're all connected. How are we connected?
Yep.
But I also remember, like,
Yeah.
sort of a little later on, like, sort of being really unclear about, like, because after Q-Link, then like AOL came along, and then the AOL was kind of the ubiquitous sort of pre-internet. I don't know if it's technically the internet. I guess it was.
Yeah, it was.
Um, and like, you have to wonder, by the way, sidebar, that like how many free 10 hours of AOL CDs there are in landfills right now. Probably,
Exactly. Oh my
you could
God.
build another Staten Island with them. But not knowing, like, in like 93, 94, or like 90, 94 or whatever, like the difference between America Online and like the internet at large. Like, there was a moment there for like a year where AOL was trying to get everyone to stay inside AOL, but there was like little ISPs, springing up, like, from all your phone companies or whatever, to get you connected to just the internet, like, directly.
Hmm.
Like AOL even had like a AOL browser built in, because I think they were trying to like lie to people or confuse them that like AOL is the internet. But it was really this walled garden, and just, yeah, like, when I finally dawned on me that like what the difference was, and that was kind of interesting, I think.
Yeah, I'm glad. I'm glad that separation happened. In fact, I believe everyone here knows Beth Ann Patrick, but that's how she got her start on the
Yep.
internet. She was the books editor or writer for AOL. So when you went to the
Uh-huh.
books channel, that was like what she did. But yeah, there was always the internet. You could always connect and use the internet, but it definitely was an interesting portal. Um, I'm glad for it. I think
Mhm.
it opened the internet up to a lot of people who never would have touched it.
I
Exactly.
think that it's interesting that there was definitely a period where I think we're all old enough to remember, where like being online was like a decisive choice you would make. Like, I'm
Hmm.
going to go down to the basement computer room and be online for an hour. Like, my mom would even,
Yes.
like, my mom would like say it in those terms. Like, I'm going to go get online for an hour. Don't pick up the phone. And then you would
Exactly.
go, like, you
Exactly.
would go down and be online, and then you would log off, and then you'd be offline, and then most of your day would be offline. Um,
Well, I'm going to make
and
a
now, what?
crazy conjecture here. I think the difference is metered versus unlimited. So if you take a look at anything, like even phone calls, you used to
Yeah.
pay per the
Hmm.
minute to make a phone call that wasn't
Oh
local.
yeah,
So it
Yeah.
made a long distance phone call was a big deal. It was like, hey, everyone, we're
it
calling
was.
grandma. Let's gather around and be as
Exactly.
quick as.
Exactly.
And then all of a sudden it just became free unlimited. And then I wouldn't say phone calls became less valuable. It was like, all right, you can make them whenever. And it wasn't such a big deal. And the same thing happened with the internet. I remember getting yelled at for racking up $70 in 1 month of using AOL a bit too long.
Yep.
And I got that yell. So there was a time when you had to like cram things in, even with text messages. Like text messages, when it cost money per text, you thought about it. You didn't just pick up and spam text people. Whereas now it's like whatever.
Yep. Yep.
I think it's maybe
Yeah.
that, combined with the ubiquity and also cheapness of connected devices themselves, right?
Hmm.
Like, so in my childhood basement, if you wanted to go online, you would have to like go downstairs and sit in front of this giant gray box connected to a television. And now, like,
Right.
wherever you're
Right.
sitting, your watch is online, your headphones are online. Look, I've got like, a pile of iPhones here that are on. Like, you're always online. Like, everything comes with the internet built in now. So like, being offline, it's
Exactly.
kind of flopped now, right? Like, being offline is something that you have to really try to do. Otherwise, you're kind of
Yes. Yes.
going to the toilet and you're still online, you know?
When um shortly, I mean, around the time you guys are talking about your interactions with like AOL and Q-Link and all of that, I was working a job that was headquartered in Huntsville, Alabama, but I was in Brooklyn at the time. And they put in a dedicated phone line for me to to connect through.
Uh,
Um, so that we could work. I wasn't always connected, is the thing. And then I had another dedicated phone line for the quote unquote office phone that was separate from my home phone line. So I mean, it just involved all of this infrastructure and cost to be able to do something that now during the pandemic we had to completely take for granted. Like if we were going to earn money during the pandemic, it was going to be through remote work. And that just the amount of like fiber optic cable that had to get laid down for that to happen is pretty extraordinary.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The whole idea of like multiple, like how many houses in America right now have like 4 completely defunct copper phone lines in them now. Like you go into the rooms and you see the little jacks, like the little
yes,
jack graveyard along the baseboards.
Yeah, there was a time where my house had 3 distinct phone lines in it, and now we have 0.
Yes.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, I haven't had a landline. I haven't had a landline for so long. I don't even remember when I last had a landline.
Exactly. I hung a wall clock over the wall jack outlet where the phone line purportedly ought to be. But even now, I mean, when we say landline, they're not truly landlines anymore. They're voice over IP, which used to be considered inferior to an actual landline. And it used to be where you could buy one of these, you could buy a phone and plug it into the wall jack and get electricity that way if your power went out, because the phone line was always on.
Well, you still can.
Oh, right.
It's a legal requirement.
It carries just enough charge to run like a unpowered phone or something.
Well, it's just enough charge to ring, you and make that connection. The actual connection itself. I mean the purpose and requirement of that, and I don't want to get too much into the weeds, but the telephone was obviously subsidized by the government because it was such an overhaul. But the requirement was that for emergency purposes, it needs to be able to carry 110 volts, so that it can power enough to ring your phone, like with the old so it had to be able to ring that phone, and then when someone picks up in a power outage, assuming that there's not a connection that's ripped, make a phone, make a message and say, here's the emergency and what you need to do.
Yep. Exactly.
So Laura, based off sorry.
Yes. No, I was just there was that big power outage in 2003 that took out like the whole eastern seaboard, and by that time people had switched over to handheld phones and mobile phones, and people were starting to get off the landline, and I could only talk to my mother and reassure her that I was okay, because I had one of those old phones that I just kept in case of emergencies like that.
Was it one of those phones where you would pull out and retract the antenna? I remember when we first got one of those, like a cordless phone in the house. So you'd be like,
yeah. Right. No, it wasn't. It was deliberately not one of those, because those required power.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Those required electricity. Yeah.
I think another interesting technological transition is like either when you got your first cell phone and or when you got your first smartphone. And I'm not sure that, like, for me, I feel like I was a late comer to some of these things. Like there were cell phones, but I don't think I had a cell phone until 98 or 99 or something. Maybe that's not late, but it was obviously just a dumb phone.
Yes.
Like
for me, it was it was 1998 for sure, and the only reason I remember that is because I was pregnant with my second child, and it was a big deal. Like, because you are pregnant you're going to have this phone so that you can, if you happen to go into labor anywhere, you can make sure you can call 911 and get taken care of.
You know what? You know what's something I just thought of that's just kind of funny is in that era of initial cell phones and then later like Blackberries, which was kind of like for me like the business precursor to a smartphone. You have like phone and texting and Breakout. Like there was one game built on there, like Breakout brick game. And like some other stuff. Maybe there was a browser on there too, but I never been able to like use it, or it was really bad technology or whatever. But in this era of like pre-smart cell phones or whatever, like everyone would like have their tech on their belt. Like we don't do that anymore at all. Like you would have your pager, and then like your flip phone case would be hanging on your belt, and you'd have all this like it was like a Batman utility belt. And like now nobody like you're either putting it in your purse or it's in your pocket or what, like kind of hidden away. And like I'm not sure like
it was
why.
difficult.
Well, first
why
off,
were we displaying our tech like we needed it in a holster like a gun, like a
yeah,
six shooter?
Yeah.
Why did we do that?
Well, fashion
difficult.
changed.
If yes. Well, if you were a woman, having that holster was problematic, right? Because women's clothes were not designed for an automatically included belt, right? So you had to make sure you were wearing pants of some kind, and B, make sure that those pants had belt loops. So it was a real pain. And I was very glad when that started to go away.
Also, technology was much more fragile. I mean, you can put your cell phone in your pocket and it can bend a little. First off, it's made of much higher quality material, but there was no Gorilla Glass. So like I know with my PDA, like if I pushed a little too hard, I would have dead pixels. Like so it needed to be on the outside in a protective case, or else it was just going to get ruined. And there was no. I guess like you could repair those, but that was harder.
Palm Pilots had like a big, like hard plastic slip case you would slip it into, and then you'd put it into like a leather case. You'd like take it out of the case, and then take it out of the case, and then take it out of the case, and then you could use it.
Yeah,
right.
Exactly.
Yeah, it was
gently.
crazy.
You would use it gently.
Yes.
But
so I want to circle back a little. So Laura, your first experience was this is a shrieking banshee, and I want nothing to do with it. So
exactly.
So when was that moment that you realized, okay, this thing is kind of cool, and maybe it's something that I'm going to have a future in?
I would say it probably was not until almost, I want to say, let's see, 1994. I was, no, prior to that, actually. I got a laptop in the early 90s. I was writing fiction, and so my ex-husband gave me a laptop, and at that point he was starting to fool around with BBSs and whatnot, and I was never into that, but I was very into the idea of databases, right? So I would send out these stories, and I had a whole database of contacts at literary magazines, and I would track, I could send out one story to 20 different places. And it really upped the odds for me in terms of acceptances, as opposed to, these one shots. So I got really into the idea of databases and, configuring them, setting them up, controlled vocabularies, drop down lists, things like that. And I got a job at a book database company, which at the time was located in Williamsburg. And that was my first exposure to the internet. It was, it was in the context of, wow, we're not going to fax stuff out anymore, to our business partners. We're going to email it an email just totally blew my mind. And then it very rapidly amped up from there, right? So Amazon came online and news was online, right? The Oklahoma bombings, reading about those, reading about, breaking news events. News became like, because prior to the internet, of course, remember, if you were exactly, yes. But if you were into media and breaking news and whatnot, and I very much was, you subscribed to a zillion magazines and you got all the newspapers, and it was just a very paper heavy environment. And once the internet sort of blew open, it really kind of like it took the doors off of what breaking news was, and became woven into our everyday lives. It wasn't like a drop everything and watch this kind of thing. And that changed the trajectory of my entire career. And I became like, I pretty much stopped writing fiction and focused on, wow, what can we do with this? This is so cool. And I never looked back. I was happy. And it's only in very recent days that I've circled back to fiction again. But I wanted nothing more to do with it. I was like, I'm going to learn SQL, and we're all connected now. And I would get nauseous thinking about it because it was so exciting.
I think this is a good question. We should all answer it, because we all pretty much work directly in technology career-wise. Like, where did we start? Like, how did we decide to start? Like, our sort of tech career origin story. Nick, will you go next?
Sure. Gosh. So, growing up, I was I was bullied, and I didn't necessarily connect with the kids my age. There's a lot of different reasons, and one could break into that. But the great thing about the early internet was it was a bunch of nerds, because it was a bunch. I mean, like, you weren't going to get a jock who was going to discover a computer and then log onto a BBS and spend, hours playing a video game. You're going to find a fellow nerd like yourself. And also, there was kind of an unspoken rule that you just don't talk about age. And you, at least the places I tended to, hover around and hang around, it was just, you talked about whatever interests you, and that was it. So if you were into, role-playing games, that's all you talked about. Like, and it was really, I found that very exciting, that it was just like, I could kind of leave all the baggage behind. So the fact that I did something stupid last year that, normally kids would continually bring up over and over again, it was like, well, all that's gone. So I ended up just inserting myself into a bunch of different communities online, and then, spending a lot of time on IRC. And I bumped into two people, I guess it was two at the time, that were developing a website called cheatworld.com, which was an online video game cheats website. So, through that, it was just like, hey, I am totally interested in learning how to do web development and all this stuff. So I started working with them, doing some really simple Photoshop stuff. Not that I was ever good at Photoshop, but none of them had it, so I was the one who did it. And I learned some basic HTML, and I learned some basic coding. And we put together that website, and we kind of built that up. So that's what got me started there. It was more just like, hey, I want to be part of something and be cool and be recognized by other human beings. And then fast forward a little bit, there was a local internet service provider, and I think I mentioned this story a few weeks ago, but they needed someone. I mean, I signed up for them, and we were getting internet, but they needed someone who could throw on rollerblades and press the reset button on the server. So I started working for them when I was like 13, and I could do HTML, and they were like, okay, do you want to, we'll just refer clients to you. So they would refer clients to me, and I got to learn, what it was like working for an internet service provider. But the great thing was it was all kind of part of that community. So the guy who ran it, or I should say the guy who was the head tech person there, like, he just took me under his wing and taught me everything he possibly could. And a lot of other people who were involved in the local BBSs, a lot of them were young like me. There was all that, like, don't meet up with people on the internet, it's scary.
Yes.
But I remember my mom one time, she's like, all right, I'm going to drop you off at the mall. I just want to see these people and make sure they're not old men. And as long as they're not, you can wander the mall with them. So I ended up meeting, and it was really interesting because I met up with 3 people, 2 of which were girls and 1 was a boy. And I didn't, you never know until you get there. And I got there and it was 2 girls and a boy. And, like, we just talked tech and we're just geek heads. And it was, back then it was, again, you could be whoever you wanted to on these, on the internet. So there was less gatekeeping. It just, I saw it as a great connector. And, I saw it as a safe place for people because you could also leave. Like, if someone was being mean to you, you just leave a chat room and that's it. So the internet has devolved as everyone has jumped on. But to me, that was kind of what made it a safe place, or at least the place for me that kept me going. And, I saw what potential, like Laura, I saw this, like, wow, with just some simple databases and some queries and some things like that, like, you can build something that creates a lot of value, or that, just does something useful or exciting. And that, I never went back.
Yep.
Do either of you have a computer science degree?
No.
What were your majors in college?
Oh, I was an English major.
Yeah.
And I just recently got a master's in, it's called Library and Information Science. So, I mean, if that constitutes a computer degree, the information science portion of things. But yeah, no, I was definitely all about the arts.
And
what about
Nick,
you?
What about you?
So-
I'll do me next.
Yeah.
You go
So,
first, Nick.
I have, from college, I have a business degree, but it's, I went to a technical school. I actually have a BS in business, so I have a bullshit and bullshit. And it's sort of a dual major. It's meant to be like that bridging between technology and business. That said, though, I went to a high school that actually had majors, and I majored in networking. My high school prepared us for the CCNA networking exam.
Wow.
I've toured a lot of the Bell facilities, and I probably could still build an entire network room that works. So I do have a technical background, but my education, and I think it's pretty standard for a lot of people back then, my education doesn't necessarily match with the software development because it was a self-taught world. I mean, we were out there sharing things with each other. I remember, and again, I give my parents a lot of credit for taking weird leaps. So my dad, because I asked him to, put me in the back of the car at 13 years old, drove me 4 towns away to some random computer shop because I was meeting a guy that I met on a BBS who was going to give me a bootleg copy of Windows 95. And he's just like, all right, I'm coming in with you. I'm like, that's okay. He's like, I just want to make sure you're safe. I'm like, yeah. And we met the guy, and the guy was, no joke, the guy was physically the South Park, the South Park guy who was playing WoW. Like, he literally was wearing a hand crimper thing, and he was very overweight and unshowered, but the nicest guy. Like, he was older.
Yeah.
I never met him in person other than at his store. But like all the time he'd be like, hey man, check out this thing, and would send me, a code example and say, hey, run this in BASIC and do, like, he was just a genuinely nice human being. You know, and I have a feeling nowadays parents would not drive their kid to meet this person. And understandably so, but yeah.
Right.
And
Well,
you,
there
Chris?
maybe would be better ways to verify their, like let's do a Zoom first
Mhm.
or something, right?
Right.
I don't know.
You can hear them or whatever. But yeah, that, and my point in asking that was because I'm the same. Like I didn't start out thinking I was going to go into technology. I majored in theater arts
Mm.
and minored in something called cultural studies and comparative literature, fully intending to like be an actor or be like like a playwright and a director of plays on a stage and write the next great American novel or whatever. But going all the way back to like junior high, like I was always like fascinated with computers and like tinkered with computers and like learned to program in BASIC on the Apple II and on my Commodore. And I would be the kid who would not just go out and like stand in a group looking cool for recess. I would like sign up for computer time in the computer lab. Um, and went all the way through college not thinking I was going to be doing technology. And then when I finally was like first on my own, like paying my own bills in my own apartment in Chicago in 95 or whatever, my first like job, like I couldn't find any work in theater. Like there was a few jobs, but it was like full-time house manager for $18,000 a year with no benefits. And like, it was really like,
Yeah.
oh, I have to be a starving artist for real if I want to do this. I'm
Mm-hmm.
not sure I want to do that. So like I looked around and I originally started out being like an office temp. There was a company called Mac Temps, where if you knew about Macintoshes, you could work at an office doing, just like secretarial stuff, mostly like MacWrite. If you knew MacWrite, this was sort of in the age like pre GUI interfaces where like a lot of
Yeah.
offices had DOS and a lot of them had. So they're like, do you know how to use AmiPro word processor for DOS? And if you had like the
Mm.
keyboard template that showed you all of the shortcuts, right? Like F4 is save and
Yep.
F7 is tab. If you had one of those, you could pretty much figure out anything. They're like, all right, we'll show up on the 57th floor of the Sears Tower. You're going to be so and so's secretary for 2 weeks. So it all sort of
Wow.
started out being secretarial stuff, and then at some point, there was like a doctor, an orthopedic surgeon at Rush Medical Center, and the Mac temps called me and they're like, "Do you know how to use FileMaker Pro?" And I was like, I think I maybe used that for a second back in college. There was like a night security log behind the desk that was FileMaker. I was like, sure, FileMaker. And he was like, well, because we have this doctor who wants to build like a patient management system, like a whole
Mm.
package from like people onboarding people and medical records and all these things. I was like, alrighty. So I spent like a couple months building this FileMaker database. And when I was done with that, I was like, holy shit, this is really fun.
Yeah.
Like I built software. Like it wasn't command line coding. It was on a Mac and it was very draggy droppy. But there was some programming. There was some like macros you had to create and write procedural stuff. Um, so as soon as I finished that, I was like, I want more of this. So I kind of looked around, and it just so happened there was a consultancy that just started an office in Chicago of somebody who left Apple from the company Claris at the time. It's now Claris again, but who had just started a
Wow.
FileMaker consultancy, and I started out as an apprentice for a year, and then 25 years later, I'm still doing the same thing. So, but yeah, it was such an interesting blend of like left brain, right brain stuff. It's so-called left brain, right brain stuff, or like creativity but technical stuff, like all smushed together. Like it has to work, but then humans need to understand how to use it, and that's
Yep.
always what's been, even to this day, the most fun part of it is like getting people, like in the early days it would be things like my very first client was this nonprofit in Chicago called Illinois Retail Merchants Association. And what I was building them sort of it was a nonprofit that was managing their members and donations and services and stuff like that. But what they were going from was literally a card catalog. Like they had like a library card catalog they had got somewhere in, I don't know, the late 70s, and like each card was a client. So like their database of their clients was literally a card catalog, and then we like made it digital. And so like those early transformations of like we're
Yep.
just paper and a couple of phones
Mhm.
to like computers on the internet with a database that everyone can share in the office was like I feel like things now are more subtly transformational But anyway, I've been blabbing now for a little while. Somebody else say something.
Well, I do want to be mindful of the time. We have about
Uh,
3 or 4 minutes left. So unless anyone has some final comments they would like on this, we can just move to giving back and then our outro.
yeah, let's do it.
Okay. So for the next section is giving back. We just talk about something we are thankful for. Pardon. Something we're thankful for and who we're going to be giving back to. I must admit I am not prepared for this week. I did not think this one through. It's been a long week. But you know what? I will stick with my default of Mary's meals. And I am thankful, at least in my area, that we have actually. So little brief story. So I got to see a presentation. A woman was appointed the head of homelessness within New Jersey, like several years ago, and her driving force was, I want zero homelessness, or at least zero preventable homelessness. And she completely revolutionized the whole entire system within New Jersey and how it works, and the whole shelter system. And statistically, she did an amazing job. I say that because I haven't witnessed a lot of things firsthand. But on paper, homelessness is drastically down, rehoming is drastically up, replacement of jobs and things like that for people, and placement of and services provided. It's just seeing things like that, within my local community is super awesome. So to provide back to a charity that does something similar, in countries that need it the most is it's pretty awesome. Chris or Laura, whoever is ready, feel free to jump in.
Laura, you go next.
Well, okay. As we're starting to, think about opening up and think about, things getting back to quote unquote normal, I've been mindful of the role that food pantries played during the pandemic, and have been worried that, as the things continue to improve, who's going to be left behind, who's going to be, who's going to continue to struggle. And I really have felt very strongly that food pantries are an unfortunate but necessary part of our social, fabric. And they just assumed such great importance during the pandemic, and I've just really felt that, like, we don't, they shouldn't be necessary, but they are, and local local groups are so intrinsically a part of the social fabric now, and donate to your local food pantry, I guess, is what I was saying.
Now, just to add to that, because it's really interesting. So I've done a lot of volunteer work and coordination with our local food pantry, as well as others. It's interesting. Some towns actually operate their own. So my town actually does have its own. It is only for our residents. That is the one restriction, but it is fed by taxpayer funding. But we also take donations, things like that. But we also do have church groups. So it's usually a mixture of both that are providing. In some areas, some areas are not covered by their town. There is no town or county or statewide food pantry, and other services do. So keep in mind when you want to donate that there are two levels. So sometimes you might want to donate to your local church if that's your thing, or you might want to donate to your local town one, knowing that there's certain restrictions usually.
Yep.
Chris?
Yeah, I would say that everyone should find the local I think there's one in every state, their state version of the ACLU, and give them some money,
Mm.
because I have to say, this is very current events with, the John Lewis Voting Rights Act and all that kind of stuff. And like,
Mhm.
regardless of which side of the political spectrum you're on, that all of us should be having a lot of fear for, our basic democracy, right now.
Yes.
So the ACLU of North Carolina is the one that I would be supporting, and I'm not sure that we at the moment have like any of the super cray voting restriction laws going on, but we have, tried to ban, abortions, and we've done the whole like, trans bathroom ban that made national news. And so there's like always something to fight. And like,
Yeah.
these are the lawyers that, as soon as any of these wackadoodle restriction, laws go into effect in all of these states like Texas and Georgia and whatever, like literally they have like lawsuits like sitting there ready to, try to make sure that, you listen to the news, and again, like whichever side of the political spectrum you're on, like most of these things like John Lewis Voting Rights Act are extremely popular with people. Like 70-80% support these kinds of protections for voting, and vote by mail, and early voting, and not heavy ID requirements, and all these kinds of things. And in fact, many of those things were initially created by Republicans, and so like it's something that's good for every person who believes in democracy. So
Mhm.
I think we should try to protect that democracy and not become what we
Absolutely.
almost became, a couple of years ago.
Yes. Yep.
Anyway,
All right. Well, thank you, Laura. Thank you, Chris. And thank you, everybody, for coming. I hope you enjoyed today's show. It'll be on YouTube later today and available on podcasts later this week. Thank you, and I will see you both in 2 weeks.
Yep.
bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.